Hey everyone, Jesse Robinson here from Impact Policy. Welcome back to the Impact Policy podcast. If you're a regular consumer of the podcast, you may see not so familiar face in me. Usually Sam is leading these introductions, but it's me today making a guest appearance on the podcast with my great colleagues Sam and Sean. Today we are going to talk about co-design, the nuances of it, how we might approach things at Impact Policy, and also tell you a little bit about the training that we might provide that might be of interest to you guys. Hopefully it's something that is passed along and might be of value to you all. So if you want to know more, please listen along. If you have any questions, reach out to us. Thank you.
But I did put that post up and ask, anyone got any questions around co-design? A couple of people come back
True.
with some stuff. There was some, interesting ones, like just for the sake of the yarn. What did they say? Kalisha commented one about power. Where is it? There you go. Yeah, someone said, what power assessment frameworks or tools beyond theory are available or employed to determine what co-design needs to be and how it needs to be practiced?
What power?
What power assessment frameworks or tools beyond theory are available?
Okay.
I was like,
It's a solid question.
I think it's a solid question. I also think it's a bit obtuse
yeah,
because they're almost questioning whether there's, I get the sense that they're questioning whether there actually exists a power imbalance between community and government, which inevitably there is.
Yeah.
But I guess if we were looking at a framework, what I'd be looking at is money, funding disparities, like who holds the purse strings, who doesn't, who are the key decision makers as well, historically as well. So looking at that historical context, rather than just looking at who are currently the key decision makers. When it comes to mob, it's always been government, right?
Yeah.
For 250 years, it's been different forms of government, not Aboriginal people. So that's an ongoing power disparity for me. I could go all day. That's probably
I think it's fair, but
It's absolutely. And for me, it's like you're calling out something, you're probably calling out the integrity of a process.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're saying the exact process is in place because the power imbalance exists, so if you're doing it well, it should be dismantled.
yeah.
So there should be no power imbalance. So you shouldn't have to sort of audit it or review it or evaluate it
Who was it?
if you're doing it well.
Who was it from?
that was Kalisha's question.
Please.
Yeah.
I think. Okay. So that definitely being harsh there, because it's not coming from a point of view of her not thinking that there doesn't appear to be a power imbalance that exists, because she certainly does know that better than I do. I think it's So it's good because it almost. I get it actually now. I'm a bit more as I'm talking about and rambling on. I think it's because it's having a tool for probably government to go like, all right, we're checking our own sort of like.
I think
It's probably come from a level of being burnt, like seeing that not occur, or the power imbalance still exists even though government are calling it co-design or whatever. That's the accountability piece, But if we're doing it well, it shouldn't exist. We should be mitigating it.
Yeah, it's a good question because it makes us think about, how do we start to build a framework around how we talk about, we talk about power a lot, the imbalance of power on these journeys. And so what does it mean when we talk about that, and how do we wrap a process around that for people that we're working with to understand that sort of stuff? I think as mob, we inherently understand that a power imbalance exists in much of this work when it's, government lead and that sort of stuff.
Could potentially turn into like a resource for like determining white privilege or something like that. You know what I mean? Like understanding
Yeah.
as leaders what is your white privilege.
Yeah.
What do you experience and how do you decolonize that? I guess.
I guess there's we could produce something similar to that as well, or something like that, like a it could be decolonization of decolonization resource, but I wouldn't say it's a checklist because I think it's much less. I think it's much more than just a tick a box exercise, but
Yeah.
looking at some of these considerations and actually having a resource developed of like considerations around power imbalances and then
Oh,
a bit more context behind that too, like a sort of introduction into how someone might be able to use this to think more broadly and laterally around power imbalances that do exist and why they exist and how they might exist and continue.
Yeah, I'd love to try and create some sort of resource that captures like best practice or case studies when people have relinquished power or shared power really well, and what that's led to in terms of outcomes. Because I think it's so I think there's so much nuance in this co-design world as well because of how different projects can look from community to community or from, you know, agency to agency based on all those variables that we know exist practically as well. So I think that, I mean, for me, that would have been really powerful for me if I was in the public sector, to being able to see like, oh, okay, that's what it looks like in this mob in health, you know, and they develop that sort of patient experience sort of, you know, system there. And, you know, they did that by giving authority and agency to this community to determine what that process looked like. And, oh, okay, maybe I can take some of that and think about how that works over here with, you know, planning, department of planning or whoever it might be.
It's often to find the situations where it's done, it's either too granular, I guess, and it's too small scale for people to go either, okay, cool, this is something that we can do on a broader scale, like when we're developing statewide policy. Or there's just like, none of those examples that exist as well. So I think that would be really helpful, particularly when we're talking about different levels of co-design as well. And trying to build a case of like, this is best practice model and this is best practice model because of X, Y, Z.
And if we think about it from our perspective, with our communities, our people, and the countries that we're working on, I don't think there is specific frameworks that exist around that sort of lens that's specific to our space. You know what I mean? Like, there might be power assessment frameworks and tools that exist when talking about co-design and sharing power and all that sort of stuff. But I think you think about, the history of what that means here, I think it's very different. And I think you talked about it at the start when you said about how one of the first points was around the history and the imbalance that sort of creates, you know, when starting that journey together and stuff like that too. So, I mean, maybe we can take that question on notice, Kalisha, and
solid, yeah.
Are we off
That's a solid
record or?
nah, we're probably recording now.
Oh,
So,
Yeah.
No,
You good?
sorry, that was my bad. I think that first part, like my interpretation, I got my back up so much over nothing. So over like an actually really valid question.
Yeah.
So it's a nice one. And hey, look, we can cut this and release this as a mini podcast, you know, because it's only a couple of questions. I think it's valuable. This other one, someone said, before we go into some of the core questions around the training we're developing, Britt Jacobson said, why do some organisations and departments use the term co-design when clearly they really mean consultation?
I think that's an easy one to answer. I think because it is a buzzword and it's usually recognised as best practice. So they want to be able to say they're doing best practice without actually doing it, and without actually putting in the effort to ensure that co-design is authentically occurring. So it essentially relates to a public relations exercise. It's lacks the depth and the breadth that's really required in many cases. And I think tries to pull focus away from the flaws in the consultation process, which is usually consulting Aboriginal communities and people at the back end of the process, where they can have very limited input and giving them very limited agency over policy development or service delivery that affects them. So I think that's why they often often misrepresent their work as co-design.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think it sort of leads into something that I think the next step would be building capability of mob and community to keep, these powerful institutions accountable. So allowing them to understand what a good process looks like when co-design is happening. So I think, ideally we get to a place where we're passing on knowledge and understanding to community to build out their capability on what a solid co-design process looks like. And that way, we're building the determination of them, the agency of community to call it out if it's not very good at all.
Yeah, and I'm going to add a different one too there about how I think that, particularly for the public sector, I think there's this recognition that we don't do consultation very well, generally. And so there's this, we know that for the most part our communities are over-consultated, or consultation is often not as effective as what it could be, or coordinated as well as it could be. And so, we shift away from actually investing in. We know that we did that training with the senior leadership group for the APC last year, and we talked about the spectrum of participation, and all those different ways that participation and consultation can sort of look like. And sometimes I think we're shifting into the language around co-design because consultation is almost becoming inherently accepted as flawed or ineffective. Whereas like sometimes there's projects that actually they don't need to be, the conditions aren't there for co-design anyway. And what this project might just really need is actually really well thought out and considered consultation that's accessible for people to be able to provide feedback and have a voice around something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think I like how the three of us had a different lens, on how we come back to that. I think people will enjoy to hear some of that.
After this, I might circle back to the Kalisha question because I feel like one called her out.
She'll come for you after it. No, I doubt
I was
it.
being a bit disrespectful to my cousin. So
Sure,
Nah,
you get
she's
messages.
right. She's right. And then there was a final one there, and it was a comment really from Kristen, who said it's not a question, but it would be awesome if you could address the issue of organisations still utilising the phrase co-designed when changes are made post-launch without further consultation. Got any thoughts around that sort of stuff, Mob?
I think it is a significant issue, and I think it also, when you look at co-design as a process, and a big part of that process is speaking back and being accountable and developing a feedback loop to ensure that what you're producing is really still in line with community feedback and staying honest to that community feedback and accurate as well. So that I think that doing changes post the co-design process, or enacting changes post the co-design process where community can't actually have an influence on those changes, is really detrimental, and it degrades the integrity of the process itself. So I would say that it's not just a case of it almost negates the process that you've been through. So you're undoing all the hard work that you've previously done and all the good work that you've previously done. So that process lacks efficiency for me, and it also lacks effectiveness. And I think that's the messaging you have to convey to organisations that are partaking in that that practice as well.
Fair. What about you, bro?
Something that sort of comes to mind for me is thinking about, it's almost similar to the other question, but the symptom of a system or, the environments that are moving too quickly is what's creating this desire to call co-design and make things happen so quickly. We talk about it at Impact Policy, the outcomes over outputs. Something that I really feel like it's a slow change, but it is happening in the sector is we are seeing, departments slowing down and understanding that, by pushing too quickly, they're going to cause harm. So I think there's definitely more awareness around timeframes and understanding that pushing too hard can actually cause harm, even when good intentions exist. And again, I think there's good practitioners out there doing good work that is heavily influencing, the way we should be doing things, which is more of a trauma-informed way. So I think there's more awareness, which is allowing for accountability to happen. And that means that we are calling out, the bureaucrats that are pushing things for reasons to sort of make it, all look great when really it isn't, and we're actually perpetrating harm on community and mobs. So there's a long way to go, but it's, I think, heading in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes me think of what we talked about yesterday. We were doing some project planning around some co-design work that we're working on at the moment, and I think you might have brought it up, Jesse, around how we're also thinking about how we are, like, what does success look like, and what does an evaluation look like when we're talking about co-designing projects. And this is a perfect example of, if you're having those conversations at the start of a co-design journey with whatever you're working on, then you'd hopefully be minimizing the risk of that sort of stuff happening. When I hear that example of someone going on a journey, co-designing something together, and then one half of that partnership goes and changes something without further communication and consultation, for me that's a real symptom of a process that's lacked integrity, and it's maybe lacked being actually we talk about co-design being really based on meaningful relationships at the forefront to making sure they're strong and successful. And so if you're part of a team, or if you've seen somebody talking about co-designing something but they're making changes without any consultation, and it's probably a real symptom that it actually probably hasn't been co-designed, because if one part of that is going to go and make changes post announcement or approval, then that's not acting with integrity, and B, there's maybe the conditions not being built there in terms of understanding what success really looks like. Because if part of that co-design journey has been talking about like what are the measures of success, and let's design them together, well then you're going to minimize the risk that you're going to actually change what you've co-designed, because you'll affect all those other metrics that exist around understanding that too. But yeah, good question.
It is. I think I just wanted to add, I feel like a part of that process of, leading with integrity and building the conditions for, co-design, prioritizing relationships at the start, what it allows you to do, through that best practice, you're actually sitting with community, the mob that we need to be sitting with, and asking them first through those relationships, is this something that you actually want? So we're actually, allowing them agency over, is this particularly, it's not just a project to a government department, or it's not just something they want to create, for their political agendas or whatever it might be. What it does, it allows mob agency over the decision whether we actually proceed or not. So I think true co-design processes actually goes through, something at the start that allows it to go whether we proceed or not. And there's criteria that sort of attached to that. If you're not doing that, you're not allowing agency from the very start. It's not co-design.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would have, even just that comment, even just reading that, I'm just sort of for me, that just speaks to that not being a co-design process and someone just slapping a label on, Yeah.
Can we circle back to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kalisha's listening, bro. Sean
Yeah.
has been sitting here just waiting to loop back on that. So question 1 was around power tools and frameworks that might exist.
Not aware of any tools or frameworks that do exist, but I think it is an important piece of the puzzle, and I think having a resource that questions someone's understanding of power imbalances and power imbalances that exist over a long period of time as well, and the factors that contribute to those power imbalances is really helpful because it helps us convey the importance of co-design and why we're trying to break those structures down in a sense. I think when you look at blackfellas, for instance, if you look at the power imbalances that exist, you look at funding disparities. Government often has resources and funding that far outweighs any resources and funding that Aboriginal communities might have access to. Inevitably, that creates a power imbalance. You look at decision-making control for over 200 years. Government has controlled decision-making as it pertains to Aboriginal communities and people, and that exists. There exists a power imbalance, and that's something that we need to recognise in order to move forward with co-design. So having a checklist to help convey that concept would be, or a resource to help convey that concept would be, I think, invaluable and make our jobs a lot easier.
It's a hard one because and Kalisha uses language like beyond theory, and so I think for us as blackfellas we're like, this is accepted as truth. Like there is no question that this is a theoretical concept we're talking about. Like there's a gross power imbalance that exists between the public sector and our communities across a range of different areas that you've really just sort of highlighted there as well. And so so for me it's like, how do we for us, I feel like that's accepted, and so we really champion a way to approach this sort of work that tries to rebalance those scales so that our people have we often talk about in our space that really meaningful co-design actually just feels like it's community led because it's sharing as much power, decision making, agency and resources with our people at that table together. And so it's interesting because even just the language of theory in there, like it just sort of feels like, man, if there's non-Aboriginal colleagues that are engaging in this space in the public sector or wherever that feel like they need a framework to understand this sort of stuff, maybe they're not ready to be working in that sort of space leading projects already, because I just feel like much of this sort of it's presumed knowledge for us because much of it is lived experience, but for the most case, if you're working in Aboriginal affairs or Aboriginal community development or co-design that has an impact for our communities, there should be a level of understanding of the sort of landscape that you're playing in terms of the history and the reality of relationships as well between systems and government and those structures and what that means in our communities as well, and not speaking for all of our communities. Some of our communities are very well placed with a lot of agency to be able to come together and co-design and really achieve meaningful outcomes alongside, government and other organisations as well. But there's absolutely some other communities of ours that are on that journey in terms of building really strong local governance structures to be able to come to the table and do that sort of stuff and, not be, for lack of a better reference, like taken advantage of by larger systems and public structures that just want to, maybe be more extractive or maybe more transactional than relational to achieve the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So, it's a great question.
It is a good one.
So I think that wraps our mini podcast there in terms of top 3 questions this week around co-design from our community. So thank you. Thank you.